Hi, Glenn here. In this video, I bust out my plane collection, I explore those and show you what I've got, and I also, for the first time, go through the process of flattening the sole, giving the blade a good sharpen, and getting this plane into great working shape. I'll show you how I did it, because I just learned to do it, and if I can do that, you can do that too. Hi, welcome back to The People's Carpenter. I am Glenn Peoples. Funny how that works. And these are my planes. I've never really shown you these before. They're a bit dusty just now because I haven't used them very recently, and I've been doing some quite dusty things in the workshop. I'm going to go through these really briefly, and then I'm going to look at, for the first time properly, for me anyway, getting them into shape and all that that entails, well, at least some of what that entails, to make them more usable and prettier, maybe not prettier, but more usable anyway. So, come and get a closer look, and I'll say more about them. So most of these are stamped with the name of either Bailey or Stanley, and those names kind of go together. Mr. Bailey, I don't know his first name, but I know a little bit about him. He worked at the Stanley Company, and we're going back many years now. I should probably have checked how long. More than 100 years. Surely more than 100 years. Yeah, a long time ago anyway, as far as my age goes. And he came up with designs for planes and blades and whatnot, and so many Stanley planes are stamped with the Bailey name. In fact, most of my Stanley planes are, except for these two. So, starting at the very bottom, these I haven't used yet. I kind of got them as well, not quite novelty items, but something that's a bit different. These are planes with curved bottoms, and they were designed for violin making, where you have to be able to plane on concave surfaces, but of course they would work equally well on a carved top guitar. Haven't used them yet. They were relatively inexpensive, and I thought that'd be nice to try out one day. This I have used, Chrome, which is a very modern brand, and it's just a small plane that's a little bit handy if you've got something little to do. But here we get into the Stanleys, and this is actually one of my favorite planes. It's the Stanley number 180 block plane, which is just a good general purpose plane for small jobs if you want to bevel the edge of an object. In fact, that's probably how I use it most. But if you just have small planing jobs, those are good. I think this is the first plane I owned. In fact, I'm quite sure it is. It's called the Stanley Handyman, and it's the size of a number 4 plane, and I just thought that it was a number 4 plane because of that. But and in terms of size classification, it's sort of a low budget version of a Stanley number 4. Well, I mean, you could bring it up to standard, but I've seen one of these dismantled, and the quality of the workmanship and the machining is just not quite as good. But you know, if you are a handyman, then it will come in handy every now and then. I have used it just to roughly make alterations. I've used it when building a shed, just to hack off some parts of the surface of framing and just general purpose stuff. This is a very nice plane. I bought this fully restored. That's why it looks like it's in such good condition. Well, because it is. This is a Stanley number 4. And Stanley number 4s are sometimes just referred to as smoothing planes, because that's what they're really good for, smoothing flat surfaces. Very nice plane. Now, I didn't have a number 5 plane for quite some time, and I heard of the virtues of a 5.5, which I'll come to shortly, being slightly larger than a number 5, and I saw for sale a number 5.25, and I thought to myself, out of ignorance, well, that must be larger than a 5, but not quite as large as a 5.5, so I'll get one. And I did, and it's nice, but it's actually smaller than a number 5. The 5.25 which is a little bit counterintuitive. That's the size of a number 5 plane, which I'll come to shortly, and well, you can see the difference in terms of both the length and the width. And this, as I now understand it, was often used in school workshops when I was going to say kids, but back in the day it would have been mostly the boys, were learning carpentry. And nothing wrong with it, it's just kind of small. This was the first number 5, well, it's the only number 5 size plane that I've got. This is not a Stanley. This is made by a company called Rapier. At the time that I bought it, I didn't know anything about Rapier, and I still know almost nothing about them, but it seems to be, it's in bad condition, and this is one of the planes that I'll have to do some work on, but it seemed like a good, solid, quality plane. It's another British company, as Stanley is also British, and I gathered that it was made throughout the 20th century. This, from what I can gather, is 1950s, maybe 60s, but sort of middle of the century. Slightly cheaper alternative to Stanley, and it really was cheaper than a Stanley, but still nonetheless very good condition. It's just very different. All the parts look so different from what you'll find on a Stanley. I must take that apart one day, give it a good clean. That's not the first one that I'm going to be working on today, though. This is the 5.5. I've tried it out, but I haven't really used it yet because of the condition in which it came to me. Well, I have to be careful how I say that. It sat unopened in the box in which it came from a seller or marketplace for some time, and then when I opened it, I found that there was rust on the sole and on the blade, which tells me that either they sent it to me in that condition or there was some moisture in the packaging. But either way, that's the one that I'm going to be working on today. Number 6, possibly the second plane that I got. I need to clean up. Now, a 6 is it's colloquially referred to as a 4 plane, and it's used not quite as a jointer, but as quite an aggressive plane for removing large amounts of material from quite long stock, and it's good for that purpose. But I didn't have a number 7 for a while, so I used this as a jointer to flatten the edge of a piece of wood when you're going to be gluing 2 pieces together, and it's actually not a bad substitute for a jointer. So there you are. In a pinch, get one of those if it's available and you don't have a number 7. And then there's a number 7, which is what most people mean when they say a jointer plane. I mean, it's just nice to have a big, long plane like that. Works brilliantly. I've used it a number of times, and you know, I'm fond of it. I would like a number 8, which is kind of even longer than that. It starts to get a bit monstrous. I just haven't been able to find one for sale locally at a decent price. So, like I said, I'm going to work on this one, my number 5.5, because it needs the work. So I'll put all these away and then show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to first of all flatten the sole. Now, you can do this with the blade in, just with the blade retracted, but because I know that the blade is going to need some work as well, I'll remove that. This is a bit tight. That may not be the recommended way to do things, but there is a thumb screw holding them together. The blade, which is called the iron, and the chip breaker, which deflects the chips off the blade so that they don't cause too much clogging, both of which have some rust going on. Just set those aside for now. Some cleaner. I've got some CRC 556, which is sort of a cleaner and lubricant in one that I'll use on that a bit later with a wire brush. But just for now, let's look at the sole, because by flattening the sole I will also be cleaning the sole, although I guess it wouldn't hurt to just take some of the more obvious rust off before I do this so that it doesn't clog up my sandpaper. Just using a piece of steel wool to do that. Now, okay, First things first, I will create a surface on which to do the flattening. You want something that's quite flat. You don't need a precision machined steel flat surface. Nothing wrong with using that if you've got one, by all means do. But don't worry if you don't. My understanding, just from looking around at what experts are telling me and just common sense, is that while you do want your plane sole to be flat, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be flat enough so that the flatness on average will flatten a piece of wood. So this piece of melamine should do the job fine. I will clamp it down to my bench. I just bought this from a big box hardware store. They call them melamine shelves, but you don't have to use it for a shelf. You can use it for whatever you like. And on the surface I'm going to attach some sandpaper. I'll use some 120 grit, and I'll be attaching it using some double-sided stick tape. Okay, now, how will I measure flatness? Well, I'll do it thus. I would like the whole thing to be flat, but there are some areas that are especially important. So the area ahead of the mouth, which is the name for the slot where the blade pokes through, that really does need to be as flat as possible, because that's how I'm going to be sort of, I guess, registering the cut as the plane enters the wood. So that's quite important. I want it to be quite flat after that as well. The further down this end you get, the less important it is, as long as there are no real high spots that are going to skew the marrying of the two surfaces. So I'll mark up the whole thing because I'd like to know how flat it is across the entire surface. Now, because this tripod on which the small camera is sitting is resting on the workbench, I may be wobbling you around a bit here, sorry for that. And although I could just use the handles, I guess I'm holding it differently because I'm really making an effort to have the sole flat against the sandpaper. Right, so the marks are all still there, and you can see that I'm taking a lot off here and here. That to me suggests that those are the high spots, so overall there's a very slight bow, like really slight, because I am actually touching these in between parts as well, just not quite as much. It's becoming quite uniform now, or more than it was, in that of course I'm still taking off more at the ends, and I can also see along there as well and a little bit along there as well, so I guess those parts are slightly higher as well, and the parts that are sitting a little bit lower are the middle parts, which I'm starting to touch more, and I'll keep going until those are shiny as well. Okay, you know, I'm going to call that done. Now, what tends to happen when you do this is you get an edge there. It's not sharp, but it's approaching sharp, because the more you flatten the bottom, the more you're going to get a right angle. And all the more so, given that I'm going to do this to clean up the side. Now, of course, the side doesn't have to be flat, I'm just cleaning it. And now, yeah, there is quite a pronounced edge there, so I'm just going to soften it. You could just do that and give yourself a chamfer. I'm going to roll the edge as I sand it. So it's quite subtle, but it does make a difference. That one now feels just a bit softer than the other one, which I'll do now. Yeah, that'll do. Doesn't need much. Okay, so I've got a plane now that has a relatively flat sole, and that's a good place to start. So here are my diamond stones. Now there are 2 stones and I have 4 levels of grit, because there is one grinding surface on each side. So this one is 400 on one side and 1000 on the other, and this one is 600 on one side and 1200 on the other. I have seen people who will grind their stones and sharpen them all the way up to the level of what they would call polishing on stones that go beyond 2, 3, 4, 5,000 grit. But I also have it on very good authority, thank you Paul Sellers, that's really quite unnecessary, and in order to have a blade that works very well, you don't really need to go any higher than the grits that I have available to me here, and so I won't be. The other reason is that I don't have any diamond stones that go higher than that, but I do have some water stones that go higher, so I could, but I won't. I will not. Now, you should use lubricant on diamond stones, and that's just to discourage bits of metal from getting stuck between the grits, and for the stone to start getting clogged up and becoming less effective. And there are a few that you can use, but one that I see used quite a lot is just everyday glass cleaner, and it seems to work for enough people that I'm just going to use it. I don't think the brand matters, but in New Zealand Mr. Muscle is popular, and it's what was on special at the supermarket today, so that's what I've got. I'm going to try doing it just by hand, but I'm also going to try using this device called a honing guide, which seems like a great idea just in terms of its physical properties, so we'll see how that goes. So, the other thing too is that, so your blade has, well, it's obviously got a bevel on it, but very often people will have a primary bevel which is at, say, 25 degrees, but that's not really the bevel that does the cutting, because they'll then have a secondary bevel at, say, 30 degrees. Not everyone uses a secondary bevel, and I'm trying to discern whether or not there is a secondary bevel on this. It's kind of too rusty at the moment to figure that out. I've cleaned some of the rust off the front and back on the sandpaper, but there's still a bit of rust on the blade. So I'll just work on the primary bevel initially, and then I'll take a look and see what previous owners have done with this thing. I'll start with 400. And people talk about the ideal range of motion. I see some people using figure of eights and some people using round motion. Just for now, just to get a feel of this, I'm going to just go back and forth. So I'm just... Okay. I think that looks about like the primary bevel there. Okay, so I'm flattening part of it, but not all of it, and now that I've gotten a fairly flat bevel there, I can see that there is a further bevel that I haven't touched yet. So yes, there is a secondary bevel on this blade. I've got one set of fingers favouring the right side, another set of fingers favouring the left side, so I'm doing my best to apply even pressure across the blade. Alright, I've just about got that bevel going all the way across. There is still a dark patch there that I haven't touched yet. Maybe there isn't a primary bevel. No, I'm quite sure there's not, because the more consistent I get, maybe I've just ground it off. No, I don't think so, because I haven't been grinding very much. We're just about there. Okay, so I've now got what appears to be a flat, consistent bevel going right across the blade. So on that basis, I will work my way up through the grits. But before I do, I want to try out my honing guide. The honing guide has kind of a clamp on top where you can hold the blade in place, and a wheel underneath so you can roll it back and forth. The trouble I'm going to have though, No, I was going to say the trouble I'm going to have is the width of the blade. The blade does just fit onto the stone. So the way you do this is you get down there and check when the angle is right so that the blade, the bevel of the blade is flat on the stone. Okay, and that to my eye looks pretty good. So what you do there is you tighten up this clamp that will now hold the blade in place, and now you just hold it steady and wheel it back and forth. I mean, it's good for consistency, isn't it? And I suppose that's the point. You can't quite get the full range of motion because the wheel will fall off the back of the stone. One downside. Yep, I mean, looks good, as you would expect. Ah, no. You see what's happened? I've obviously set the honing guide to a slightly, very slightly, by maybe 1 or 2 degrees to what I was initially doing, so now there are 2 bevels there. Almost the same, but not quite. So I'll, well, now that I've got it in the honing guide, I'll just continue with this until I've got one bevel again, and then I'll move up through the grits. Alright, so now I have one consistent primary bevel, and in that process I quickly learned the value of having a secondary bevel. Grinding that primary bevel took a long time. Now part of that will be because I'm not very practiced at sharpening plain blades. I've never really done it properly before, but part of it is just that it's a lot of grinding. You know, that would have taken, oh gosh, let me have a look. Okay, so I estimate that I've been grinding for more than 25 minutes. I suppose I've taken a couple of breaks to have a drink, but point is, it's a lot of work. Whereas grinding a secondary bevel on there means that you'll be doing a lot less work. But okay, now I've got the primary bevel ground. I'm going to go up through the grades and up through the various grits of stone and sharpen that further, polish it further, call it what you will, and then I'll come back and do a secondary bevel. Now, this isn't going to take very long because the bevel is created. All I'm doing now is making the scratches on the surface finer. So that would have been about 30 strokes. I can see that that looks finer. So just like that, I'm up to the next one. Again, that was 30 strokes. See, I don't really know how many I should be giving it. I'll give it 30 more. It certainly won't do any harm. And one more. A few more for good measure. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that that's looking more polished. Now, if you notice, there seems like a burnished spot on this side of the blade. That's just where I was removing the rust using the sandpaper. The condition of that side of the blade isn't all that important because that's not what forms the cutting edge. It's that side and the bevel that are the important surfaces here. And lastly, 1200 grit. Okay, I wasn't counting, but I estimate that's more than 60 strokes there. See, there should, in theory, be a burr forming here, but I can't really feel one, but it's definitely being sharpened all the way to the edge, so it could just be that somehow I'm knocking the burr off. I'm not sure. Not sure. But what I'm going to do now is I'll go back to 400. And I'm going to do a couple of things. Well, no, I'll just do one thing initially. So what I'll do is change the angle by drawing the blade up a little bit closer. It's So that's not quite 45 degrees. Exactly what it is, I'm not sure, because the precise angle actually doesn't matter all that much, as long as it's something like that, which is roughly 30 degrees. Okay, now I'm going to give this 20 quick strokes on each grit. I'll give it 20 more because I'm not quite happy. I can see a primary bevel forming, a secondary bevel forming, but I'm not happy with just how tiny it is at the moment. I'll give it 20 more. So you should be able to see, in fact I know you can see, that there is, just on the edge of that blade, a second bevel forming. I'm going to give it 20 more. It doesn't need to be very large, but I'd like it to be just a fraction larger than it is now. And 10 more. Okay, and I think that'll do. So now I'm just going to once more go through all the grits and further polish that secondary bevel that I've just created. Okay, I can definitely see a burr forming along the edge, but I won't touch that just yet. Alright, so I've got a nice clean secondary bevel formed there, ground all the way up to 1200, and that, as I said, is as high as I'm going to go in terms of grits. I'm going with Paul Sellers and not Matt Estley. Don't get me wrong, Matt, I have absolutely no doubt that your plain blades are sharper, but I think this is probably going to be as sharp as I need. So now I'm sitting this side of the blade, which is the top of the blade because the bevel will be down, and I'm just going to flatten this blade up to the point, the cutting point, because those two surfaces, the bevel and the top, are the important surfaces. Be very careful I'm being very careful that I don't raise the blade at all and have any impact on the tip of it, just the top. That pulling motion, I'm just trying to see if I can pull the burr off. In fact, I may already have done so without thinking about it, which is fine. Yeah, there's no burr there now. I've obviously removed it. Okay, so any blemishes you can see on the end there, that's just liquid. I guess the thing to do then, and some people take their arm and shave hair off to show that their blade is sharp. I'm not going to do that. Number one, I don't really want a shaved patch on my arm, but number two, this is a sharp object. I want to be careful. I'm going to put this into the plane and try it out. Actually, slight lie, just using a fine grit, I'll start with 1000. I'll try to put a slight camber on this. Now this is, well, in my mind, at this point in my experience anyway, this seems like an advanced thing to do for people who kind of know what they're doing, so it's perhaps risky for me. I'm just finding pretty much where that bevel was that I had, and I'm just ever so slightly raising this corner, like barely noticeable, and I'll give it 10 strokes, and then ever so slightly raising this corner and then giving 10 strokes. Alright, That looks successful to me. It looks like what the experts show me when they've done it. So there's a slight radius, just ever so slightly, on each end. I'll try it over here as well. Okay, whether that's adequate or not, I don't know, but you can see that I've done it. Although it is really supposed to... Oh, no, the radius does kind of go to the tip. I'm not going to tempt fate, I'll just leave that for now. Maybe I'll come back another time and learn to properly camber a blade, but I'll try the blade out. So what am I exposing there? Maybe just over 2 mils of blade. I think that's about right based on what I've seen. Okay, let's go. So I'm starting out with something easier. I have this piece of poplar, which as you know is not a very hard wood. I've initially dialed the blade forward to take a fairly substantial bite. Let's see how we go. Maybe too large. And am I going against the grain or not? It can be difficult to tell sometimes, especially if the grain is... Yeah, I am going slightly against the grain, ever so slightly, but I'm trying to take off too much as well. That was a bit silly. A bit of a silly size that was, so I'll dial it back a little. So that's a decent full width. It's slightly thinner on one side than the other, which means that I'm not quite adjusted straight. I'll dial the blade back a little bit and see which side disappears from the cut. Oh no, maybe that's... Actually, that's quite uniform. Yeah, happy with that. So just make it a little bit thinner, because one of the nice things about having a sharp blade is that you can get very thin shavings. Yeah, that's nice and uniform. Now, I've never used a plane that was sharpened quite this well, I suppose. This is the word I'm looking for. Didn't want to praise it too much, but that's sharpened well. This is performing very nicely. Just dialed it back a little bit further, and that's, I mean, it's transparent. That's incredible. Whoa, that's nice. Yeah, I mean, you would never ever have any need to remove less than that. That's ridiculous. So I've made it easy for myself, as I said, with this piece of poplar. I'm going to make it slightly harder on myself now with a piece of limu. Now I constantly refer to limu as a hardwood because it is really hard, but it's classified as a softwood, some technicality about the tree being a conifer or something. But it's a heck of a lot harder than poplar, is my point. So I'll dial the blade forward just a little bit. I've never planed limu so nicely. Look at that. Now I'll dial the blade back a little bit more because thin tissue pieces of shaving are nice. I mean, you know, you could do this all day because it really is pleasant. I mean, that's thinner than paper, although it kind of feels like paper. See how thin I can go. Won't be able to go as thin as the poplar, probably. Oh, not enough blade to cut anything there. Just about. Yeah, that's probably as thin as I can go, and you know, that really is as thin as, was thinner than I would even need to go. I mean, it is incredible. That's a thing of beauty, and I'm assuming that I'm going with the grain here. Yeah, I am, although the grain is quite straight, it might not make any difference the other way, but it has a slight direction to it. Well, look. So I've never, ever gone through the sharpening process of a plane before. Some will be looking at this and saying that I could have gone further. I could certainly have gone through finer grits. I could have used a strop and polishing paste, which is just really like an extremely fine grit. There wasn't any need to do that. When you're woodworking, you never need to be able to plane smoother than this. That would be just flexing for the point of it. That would be like being a bodybuilder when all you need to be is just a strong guy. So look, as I say, I've never done it before. This was my first attempt. If you have the proper tools, you can do it. It's not difficult. So, I'm calling this a success. Now I've got all those other planes to go through. I'm not going to do them all in one day. I will, I don't know, maybe once every few days pick up a plane and go through that process with it. And by the end of a couple of weeks, I'll have a nice, sharp, functional set of very good planes. Will I actually do it in the next couple of weeks? I don't know, but I could. Come back soon. I am the People's Carpenter. I still have other projects on the go. I'm working on that walnut slab coffee table, so I imagine that's what I'll be doing the next time you see me. Until then.